So the book deals with a lot of themes. One of the main themes is modenomics. And you speak a lot about these phrases. In fact, I was quite amused to read all the acronyms, FFF and AIA and all that which Narendra Modi and his people have. But you sort of come to the conclusion that there are 14 things which are listed out as modenomics from Debroy's book, and that there is nothing really called modenomics. Could you explain that to the audience, why you came to that conclusion?
So, if we look at the ideology of the Bharatiya Janasangh, it was founded in 1951. For many decades, it doesn't have what you might call a coherent economic ideology. So, till Mr. Vajpayee was heading the party promised in its manifesto that it would limit the average monthly income of all Indians, whether it's me or Gautam Adani, to rupees 2,000 a month. Whatever the individual made over that, the state would appropriate, which seems to me to be a fairly sort of neo-socialist sort of idea. They also said, and this is also during Mr. Vajpayee's time, that no house could be built on a plot of more than a certain area anywhere in India. So these were the sorts of things that the party wanted. They did not want automation in any industry except for defense and aerospace, because they felt that if machinery came in, people would lose work. They did not want the use of tractors, because that would mean that the bullock would get slaughtered. From there we moved. So this is not just the official economic policy of the Bharatiya Janasangh and the BJP, but it was published in manifestos. What Mr. Modi has done and what was done by Mr. Vajpayee before him was to just go along with whatever was happening in the mainstream. So if it was liberalization, they would go that way. If it was socialism, they would go that way. Unfortunately, what has happened under him is now quite clear. I can't hide from my record when I'm in year 9. If I'm in the first year, I might be able to give an excuse. There might not be enough data. In year 9, I don't have that excuse anymore. And if, with your permission, I'll just go through some of the things that I have in my book. So the broad point is that India is not describing the success trajectory of China. We are not doing the same things as South Korea. And I'm talking on the side of the economy. We are not describing the trajectory of Vietnam. Bangladesh, which was roughly about half as much behind us in per capita income in 2014. We were at about $1,600 per capita in 2014. Bangladesh was at about $1,100. Bangladesh has gone in front of us and has remained in front and will remain in front according to the IMF. Why that is the case? We can only discuss something if I acknowledge there is a problem. If I don't talk about the problem, if I talk about Cheetah and I talk about Vande Bharat Express and the G20 summit, you're not going to ask me about why it is that you've taken our country below Bangladesh. We don't ask him, and therefore he doesn't have to answer. It is not entirely his fault, I should specify this. In 1990, on the cusp of liberalization, India was ahead of China in per capita dollar terms. We were roughly around $370, they were roughly around 320. India was ahead of China in 1990. In 32 years of liberalization, they have gone, for us, they have gone 5.5 times ahead. They are at about $12,500, we are at about 2,100. India has the lowest labor force participation rate in South Asia, perhaps in the world. We don't know what the data for Somalia is or what the data for Afghanistan is after the Taliban took over. It's lower than Bangladesh, lower than Pakistan, lower than it has ever been in India's history. It's 40%. To give you a perspective of what 40% means, in the US it's 61%. In China and Vietnam it's more than 70%. It's 40% here. More Indians were working in 2014 than are working today. Though 12 crore more people came into the labor force. Not only have we created jobs, not only have we held on to the jobs we had, we've lost the jobs that we had in 2014. That is the situation. This is government data. There are two sources of data on jobs. One is a private company called CMI, which publishes monthly figures. One is the government's PLFS, the labor force survey. If you look at the data closely, there is no real difference, and both are in agreement with what I'm saying. how will we be a developed country when the majority of people who are adults are not working? Again, this is a question that you can only answer if it's asked. If we don't talk about it, it's fine. India's manufacturing to GDP ratio has gone down after the Make in India program. It used to be about 16% in 2014, it's today about 14%. In the same period, Bangladesh and Vietnam have gone up. So it could have been done, but we didn't know how. Manufacturing jobs, according to a study by Ashoka University, have halved since 2016. Roughly about 5 crore jobs in 2016, roughly about 2.5 crore jobs last year. Manrega, which Mr. Modi called a monument to failure, became 4 times the size that it was in 2014. And the reason for that is there's no work. People want to depend on something, they want to work. There are no jobs. At first, the Modi government increased the size of the Manrega program to 4 times what it was in 2014. After that, they felt that this was too high a cost on the exchequer. I'm speculating. And what they've done is 2 things. One is cut the budget, deny the budget, including to places like Bengal, which are not paid the money anymore, and make it difficult for workers to claim their dues, to make it more digital. I can't get a proper signal in my flat in Bangalore. The laborer in Bihar and Jharkhand has to make sure that she's filling in her details online before she picks up that money and does that job. Jobs in agriculture have gone up for the first time since 1947 in the last 24 months. More people are today working as laborers in the fields of India than they were 2 years ago. And the reason is we can't create jobs in manufacturing and services. People have no option, they're going back to the farm. First time in 75 years. There is much talk about how fast we are growing. And I don't dispute those numbers. The fact is that before COVID hit, for 9 quarters, for 2 years and 3 months, GDP growth sequentially declined, step by step, for 9 quarters. And we are more or less on the pathway to 5 or 6%, which is not going to make us the next China. But once again, we don't talk about it. What they did was, they spoke in the early part of his first tenure about fastest growing economy. When for 2 years it went into a tailspin, they stopped talking about it entirely. They spoke about other things. And this is something that they do regularly, that where the news is bad, you try, and the media is sort of pliable, you can change the subject and talk about whatever else it is that you want. The RBI conducts something called a consumer confidence survey. This happens in 19 cities and has been happening regularly during most of Mr. Modi's period. The majority of Indians since January 2017 have been saying that they are worse off today than they were 1 year ago. Since January 2017, with the exception of 1 month, which is April, May 2019. For 6 years, they've been saying that our lives are getting worse, and they're worse this year than they were last year, worse last year than they were the year before that. The government had a consumer confidence, the Modi government published, or actually did not publish, a survey on consumer expenditure, which showed that in 2018, Indians were buying less food than they were in 2012. When this report was published, the government disowned it. They didn't let it be released. And this is also one more thing that they do, that when the bad news comes, even from the government itself, it is suppressed in some form. There was a jobs report that came out in 2019, which said that India, for the first time since 1971, which is when the data began to be gathered, unemployment was at 6%. It had doubled over the 3, normally it used to be 3. So it had doubled in 2018. The government suppressed that report. It sent out Niti Aayog to discredit it, to say that we've got so much Uber and Ola and so on. After the election was won, the report was released without change. Today, 3 years later, it no longer disputes that joblessness in India has remained over 6% since that report came out. There is no change. We don't talk about it, we don't ask him the questions, or we don't have a voice. But the fact is that the record of the government, according to its own figures, shows that we are in the worst possible phase of India's economy, and no chance at all of catching up with China, despite all the bombast. uh, the middle class is not growing in India. Now, this should give us pause. When I was young, there was always some hope that if you got yourself educated, you might get a job and you might be able to pay off your EMIs. And how do I know this? The number of residential properties that are sold in the 8 major cities of India has remained flat for 10 years, at roughly about 3 lakhs. It's been lower than that in the last 3 years, but let's say it's due to COVID. No growth. The number of motorcycles that we sell in India is lower today than it was a decade ago. People talk about a K-shaped recovery. So more people are coming into adulthood. More people want to buy motorcycles. Fewer people are actually buying them. This is not how growth happens. You can't grow an economy by selling less stuff, by making less stuff. People talk about a K-shaped recovery. If you look at the average sales of cars in India in the last 3 years, there was a problem of production because of the pandemic. And you compare it to 6 years ago, it's the same. There's no growth. No new people are coming into the economy to buy more stuff. I'll give you a number which will tell you what the size of the middle class in India is. The 3 German luxury car makers, BMW, Audi, and a Mercedes-Benz, they sell about 20 lakh cars in China every year, 2 million. The number of cars these 3 brands sell in India is 20,000, 1%. We are a rounding error, we don't count. But if you look at the rhetoric, if you look at the bombast, it is about that here comes the next global superpower and the world should watch out. Two or three last things here. One is that 60% of India depends on free grain to survive. We know this. We say this as a matter of pride that the government's giving all this 5 kilos of rice and wheat free. But that's 80 crore people that are dependent, that have to line up every month to be able to get enough grain in their house to survive. And the last point on this is that I looked at 53 global indices, whether on women's safety, whether on the economy, whether on governance. On 49 of these, India has fallen since 2014. These are not indices that are made within India by the anti-nationals, not made by people who are biased against Mr. Modi. These are ones that have been produced and made and run for decades. We are falling on these, but we are not talking about them because when the government is asked something, for instance, on hunger, is hunger growing in India? When the outside world says, yes, your own data is showing that it's growing, the government says that you're biased. If we have this level of debate when you have a problem, we will never have a solution.